I'd like to talk to you about Dorothy Levitt, who was the first British woman racing driver, holder of the world's first water speed record, the women's world land speed record, and an author. Dorothy was born with the name Elizabeth Levi in Hackney, London in 1882. In 1882, Queen Victoria was on the throne. P.T. Barnum bought Jumbo from London Zoo. Holborn Viaduct Power Station, the world's first coal-fired power station, opened to generate electricity for public use. Britain's first electric trams started to run in East London, and the Married Women's Property Act was passed to enable wives to buy, own and sell property and to keep their own earnings. We don't know a lot about Dorothy's early life, but in 1902 she was employed as a secretary by Napier and Son in Vine Street, London. Napier's was an engineering company who were making aero engines and cars when Dorothy joined them. They were being driven in races by Selwyn Edge, who was an importer for the French de Dion Bouton cars. Edge had the idea of entering a woman in early motoring events, hoping to make cars popular with women. He noticed Dorothy and advised her to make a career in automobiles. He arranged for a 6-month apprenticeship for Dorothy in France. Some sources say this was at the de Dion factory in Paris, where she learned all aspects of both driving, building and maintaining cars, including cleaning them. You can see that the early de Dion had a tiller to steer it, not a steering wheel, which Dorothy probably came across as a learner. Dorothy started to compete in races in 1903. She became the first British woman to take part in a speed competition when she made her debut in speed races at the Southport Speed Trials and completed a flying kilometre in a time of 1 minute 45 seconds. This caused quite a stir at a time when women were expected to remain at home. In 1905, she set her first ladies' world speed record, driving a Napier at a speed of 79.75 miles an hour. She broke that the following year when she recorded a speed of 90.88 miles an hour over another flying kilometre. She was described as the fastest girl on earth and the champion lady motorist of the world. But Dorothy wasn't just interested in racing cars. In July 1903, she won the first British International Harmsworth Trophy for motorboats. But as the boat was owned by Edge, it is his name and not hers on the trophy. She went on to set the world's first water speed record when she achieved 19.3 miles an hour in a Napier speedboat. At Cowes in 1903, she drove the Napier motorboat and won her race. She was then commanded by King Edward VII to visit the royal yacht Albert and Victoria, where he congratulated her on her pluck and skill. That same year in France, she won both the Gaston Menier Cup and the Championship of the Seas. In 1909, Dorothy went to the Hubert Latham School of Aviation in France to learn to fly, and she became a member of the Aero Club of the United Kingdom in January 1910, which became the Royal Aero Club later that year. There is no evidence that she gained her pilot's license. As well as competing, Dorothy wanted to open up motoring to women as much as Napier and de Dion. Edwardian women interested or involved in anything to do with engines were seen to be manly in outlook, temperament and dress. To avoid accusations of this, or being seen as eccentric and spinsterish, it appears that they all thought their best chance was to align Dorothy with Edwardian ideals of femininity. She raced dressed in flattering feminine outfits, complete with ankle-length tea-coat, coordinated hat and often a veil, but no lace or anything fluffy, as she said that they would be regretted after the first half-dozen miles of driving. Dorothy's drive from London to Liverpool and back in 1905 is the one which showed what a woman could do. If I was planning the trip today, I'd get my car keys, sat-nav, fill up with petrol and expect to take 4 hours each way to get there and back. But Dorothy had to do a lot more preparation. She would have been able to get a map, but it would not have been any great detail. She may, as many early motorists did, use a cycle contour map so she could see what hills and obstacles she might meet on the way. She would not have seen many signposts on the way. The Motor Car Act of 1903 made local authorities responsible for placing certain warnings at crossroads, steep hills and dangerous bends only. Larger motoring clubs, like the AA, added their own direction signs, but there was no standard sign in use. She advised drivers to give courtesy to everyone, even, she said, the men in blue, who may think it necessary to take your name and address for exceeding the legal speed limit. This was 20 miles an hour from the Motor Car Act of 1903. There were no petrol filling stations. Instead, petrol was bought from a variety of places, including cycle dealers, hotels, ironmongers, chemists, repair garages, blacksmiths and general stores. She may have carried a 2-gallon can of petrol, as this was the common way to sell petrol from 1900. She could average 28 to 30 miles a gallon in her car. Dorothy would have checked that her toolkit was complete and that she had the overall she designed to wear so that her driving clothes would not be damaged if she had to make a repair. Dorothy put all of this information and more in her book, The Woman and the Car, a chatty little handbook for all women who motor or want to motor, published in 1909. Printed copies are still available, and it's a good insight of motoring for women at that time. She will have put her black Pomeranian dog called Dodo, her official observer, into the car, a mirror with a handle in the flap pocket of the car which could be easily reached and used whilst continuing to steer with the other hand, and check the content of the secret drawer under her seat. Finally, she will have added her gun. In her book she writes, "If you are going to drive alone in the highways and byways, it might be advisable to carry a small revolver." She continues, "I have an automatic Colt and find it very easily to handle as there is practically no recoil, a great consideration to a woman." Dorothy was ready to start the car, but there was no key and she had to go through a set of steps to get the engine going. The gear had to be in neutral, the ignition lever retarded, and the air lever set in the correct position for that car. The electric current was turned on by setting the switch on the coil to N. The crank handle could then be fitted into a notch at the front of the car and pulled upwards and released as soon as it came over the resisting point. Dorothy warned that this had to be repeated several times if the car hadn't been used for a while, and she also warned that the handle should not be pushed down as it could kick back, which could result in a broken arm. On the 29th of March 1905, she departed at 7 a.m. from the De Dion showroom in Great Marlborough Street, London, driving an 8-horsepower single-cylinder De Dion. She reached Coventry at 11:36 and arrived at the Adelphi Hotel in Liverpool at 6:10 in the evening, having completed 205 miles. In her journal she wrote, "Did Liverpool and back to London in 2 days, averaging a level 25 miles per hour throughout for the entire 411 miles. She had established the record for the longest drive achieved by a lady driver." Women did follow in her footsteps, including Queen Alexandra and the royal princesses. Dorothy wrote that if a woman wants to learn how to drive and to understand a motor car, she can and will learn as quickly as a man. There are many women whose keen eyes can detect and whose deft fingers can remedy a loose nut or a false electrical connection in half the time that a professional chauffeur would spend upon the work. She deserves to be remembered as a pioneering female driver.